I'm 87 years old now, and I've been living alone in this small apartment for more than 2 decades. Not because I was abandoned, but because I was the one who walked away. One cold evening in early December of 2002, I left my husband and my 3 children behind. And in all these years, I never once said sorry for it. Not once. People hear that, and they make up their minds quickly. They think they know the kind of woman I must have been. A wife who left after nearly 4 decades of marriage. A mother who walked out on her own children. It sounds unforgivable, but what I'm about to tell you isn't simple. It's about things that looked real, but weren't. About money that should have never been paid. And about a truth that stayed buried for years, until it came back in the form of a journal that changed everything. Before I go further, I want to ask you something honestly. If you were in a situation where the truth made you look guilty and silence made you look even worse, what would you do? Would you fight to explain yourself? Or would you walk away? Tell me in the comments, because by the end of this story, you might see that answer differently. My name is Lillian Carter. I married my husband Robert in the summer of 1965. I was 26 and he was 30. He worked long hours driving a city bus, and I was just starting out as a nurse. Back then, safety wasn't something women like me felt often, but with Robert, I did. He made the world feel steady, even when it wasn't. We bought a narrow little house on a quiet street for barely anything by today's standards. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, and slowly we filled it with life. Our first son, Daniel, was born in '67. Our daughter, Angela, came 2 years later, and then our youngest, Marcus, arrived in 1972. 3 kids, tight space, thin walls, but a full heart. You could hear footsteps, laughter, arguments, everything. And somehow that noise made it feel like home. I worked at a hospital downtown, and those early years weren't easy. I was one of the few black nurses on my floor. I had doctors who wouldn't hand things to me directly. I learnt quickly that I couldn't afford to be average. I had to be better, sharper, stronger, every single day. And I was. I built a career out of determination. I stayed late, picked up extra shifts, proved myself over and over again. Not because I wanted praise, but because I needed to survive in a place that wasn't built for me. There was one doctor, though, Dr. Leonard Hayes. He was older than me by about 10 years, a cardiologist, and he treated me differently. Not special, just fair. He respected my work, called me by my title, included me in discussions. For the first time, I felt seen as a professional, not just tolerated. And yes, I appreciated that. Maybe more than I realized at the time. But appreciation is not the same as betrayal, even though someone later decided to turn it into exactly that. Her name was Gloria Simmons. She had known my husband since they were kids, grew up just a few houses down. At first it seemed harmless. She'd come by for dinners, birthdays, holidays. She brought desserts, laughed with my children. For years I believed she did. I trusted her. I let her into my home, my life. I never imagined she was watching, studying, waiting. Then one afternoon in 2000, she came over while Robert was at work. She sat across from me and placed an envelope in front of me. Inside were photographs, Me sitting at a restaurant with Dr. Hayes. Me getting into his car. Every image was real, but the story they told wasn't. She told me there was nothing between me and that man, and she knew it. But she just smiled. Then she told me what she wanted. $600 a month, cash. Or the photos would find their way to my husband. And here's the part where I know people start judging me. I paid her. For over 2 years I gave her that money, month after month. Not because I was guilty, but because I was tired. Tired of explaining myself. Tired of defending my character. And the idea of sitting in front of my own husband after nearly 40 years together and having to prove my loyalty, I just couldn't do it. One evening in December 2002, Robert came home with those same photos and something else. Bank records. Every withdrawal I had made, laid out neatly like evidence in a courtroom. He didn't yell. He just looked at me and asked one question. How long? I tried to explain. I told him nothing had happened. But then he pointed to the money, and I realized the truth sounded worse than the lie. Because what kind of innocent person pays in silence? I could see it in his eyes. Doubt had already settled in. And then the doorbell rang. He opened the door, and Gloria walked in. The same woman who had built this entire lie. She looked at the photos like she had never seen them before, placed her hand on his arm, comforted him, and I stood there watching a performance so perfect it made me feel invisible in my own life. That's when I understood everything. She didn't want my money. She wanted my life, and she was taking it. Piece by piece, right in front of me. I tried to speak. I told him she was the one behind it all, but he cut me off. Just 2 words, sharp and final. And in that moment, something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, completely. I walked upstairs, packed a small bag, came back down, and no one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. I walked past her, standing there with that same calm expression, and I left. I didn't look back. Because looking back is something you do when there's still something worth holding on to. And in that moment, there wasn't. The next morning, my phone rang before the sun was fully up. It was Daniel, my firstborn. His voice wasn't angry. It was cold. The kind of cold that tells you a decision has already been made. He said his father had shown them everything. The photographs, the bank records, the timeline. Then he asked me a question. But it didn't feel like a question. It felt like a verdict. Mom, how long has this been going on? I tried to speak. I said his name the way I used to when he was a boy, hoping maybe something in him would remember who I was before all of this. But he didn't let me finish. He said the money proved everything, that no innocent person hides payments like that. And just like that, decades of raising him, of loving him, of standing by him, were reduced to suspicion in a single morning. Angela didn't call. She sent a letter instead. 1 page, neat handwriting, careful words. She wrote that she always wondered about my late shifts at the hospital, that now things made sense. I read that line over and over again. Those nights I worked weren't secrets. They were sacrifices. Nights I spent exhausted, missing dinners and birthdays, so my children could have more than I did. And somehow, those same sacrifices became the evidence used against me. Marcus. He didn't even speak to me directly. He told Daniel to pass along a message, said I would never meet his daughter, said a woman who could do something like this didn't deserve to be part of a child's life. Not mom, not mama, just a woman. I remember sitting there holding the phone after Daniel hung up, staring at the wall like it might explain how everything unraveled so quickly. And while my family was shutting their doors on me, Gloria was stepping into my place. Within weeks, she was living in my house, sleeping in my bed, using my kitchen, my dishes, my memories. And less than 2 years later, she married Robert. Same church where we had said our vows decades earlier. Same pews, same walls that had witnessed our beginning, now watching my replacement take my place. I heard she wore white. That detail stayed with me longer than it should have, not because of the color itself, but because of what it represented. A fresh start, a clean story. As if the past could be rewritten just by changing who stands at the altar. I moved into a small apartment across town. Nothing like the home I had built my life in. Just a few rooms, thin walls, and more silence than I knew how to handle. After years of constant noise, children, footsteps, laughter, silence felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. I kept working for a while, finished my career quietly. Decades of service reduced to a plaque and a handshake. I put that plaque in a drawer because recognition doesn't sit across from you at dinner. It doesn't call you late at night. It doesn't remind you that you mattered to someone. Years passed. Birthdays came and went, holidays too. I stopped expecting calls, stopped hoping for apologies. Life became routine. Coffee in the morning, quiet afternoons, even quieter nights. I heard things here and there. My grandchildren grew up calling someone else Grandma. They built memories in the house I helped create, without me in them, and I let it happen. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to break through something so completely built against me. Time has a strange way of settling things, not fixing them, just settling them, like dust. You learn to live around it. Then, 2 months ago, something changed. It was a Saturday afternoon. My phone rang and I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick it up. A woman's voice on the other end asked if I was Lillian Carter. She introduced herself as Vanessa, Gloria's daughter. She told me her mother had passed away a few weeks earlier. I didn't know what to feel hearing that. Not sadness, not relief, just stillness. Then she said she had found something while going through her mother's belongings, something I needed to see. She came over that same day. She sat across from me at my kitchen table and placed a worn, leather-bound notebook in front of me. It was held together with a simple band. Before I touched it, she apologized, not in a rushed way, not like someone trying to get it over with. It felt genuine, heavy. I opened the journal. Page after page. It was all there. Plans, dates, names. Every detail written in Gloria's own handwriting. The photographer she hired to follow me. The staged timing of the photos. The way she chose moments that could be misunderstood if taken out of context. Even the money. Every payment I made was recorded, not as guilt, but as proof that her plan was working. She had built it carefully, slowly, and then I found the entry that stayed with me. She wrote that Robert had always belonged to her, that I just happened to get there first, but she believed patience would fix that. She believed I would eventually remove myself, because women like me always do. Women like me. I sat there for a long time after reading that, thinking about all the years I spent proving myself, fighting to be respected, holding everything together, and in the end, the one thing that destroyed my life wasn't loud or forceful. It was quiet, calculated, patient. Vanessa told me she had already sent copies of the journal to my children. Every page, every detail. She said they deserved to know the truth. 3 days later, Daniel called again. But this time, his voice was different. He didn't start with a question. He just said, "Mom," and then silence. By the time Angela arrived from Philadelphia, a quiet tension had already settled into the apartment. Walking through the door, she paused and just looked. Not at the walls, not at the worn furniture, but at me. For the first time in over 23 years, she was seeing her mother, the woman who had been there all along, even when life had tried to erase me. Her face softened. She whispered, almost to herself, This is where you've been all this time?" "Yes, baby," I said, my voice low. "This is where I've been." Tears welled up in her eyes as she stepped closer. She reached for my hands, the hands she hadn't held in over 2 decades, 23 years. That's over 8,000 days without the touch of her daughter's hands in mine. And now, in that moment, they were back. Warm, real, life returning after decades of absence. Angela clutched my hands tightly, as if holding on to the part of her own history she had almost lost. Terence still hadn't called. Marcus had read the journal and sat in silence for 3 days, unsure of what to do, unsure how to approach the mother he thought he knew, but never truly did. He had built an entire narrative of our lives around Gloria's carefully constructed lies. And yet, here we were, standing at the edge of what truth could reclaim. For the first time, I realized just how patient life forces you to be. It tests you, stretches your resilience, and then leaves you in quiet reflection, measuring your endurance against the years you've survived. I could feel the weight of the years settle around my shoulders. But instead of crushing me, it reminded me that I was still standing, still breathing, still present. Even if my children had built walls of doubt, even if my husband had chosen another, my existence, my story, could not be erased. I thought of that cold December night in 2002, when everything seemed to collapse. Robert had let Gloria walk beside him, hand on his shoulder. He chose her over me, and at the time, it shattered a lifetime of memories, sacrifices, and shared love. But now, reflecting on that moment, I understood something deeper. Survival does not always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from knowing when to step away with dignity, and sometimes it comes from waiting, for years if necessary, for the truth to finally resurface. A few weeks after Angela arrived, Diane came as well. She had flown in quietly, bringing with her the anticipation of long overdue reunions. The apartment, which had been silent for so long, felt lighter. Conversations resumed, not the forced politeness of strangers, but the raw, imperfect rhythm of a family cautiously reclaiming connection. Diane had brought news of Kayla, my granddaughter, who was now 25. She had never met me before, and in a few short weeks she would finally walk through that door. I imagined the moment in my mind, holding her face gently in my hands, feeling the warmth of life passing from one generation to the next, without the shadows of what was stolen weighing her down. She would know me as I truly am, not the stories, not the photographs, not the carefully orchestrated lies. I spent the days leading up to that moment preparing, not my home, not my apartment, but my heart, preparing to receive life in its full, messy, complicated beauty, preparing to embrace the granddaughter who had grown up in a narrative that wasn't hers to carry, preparing to say nothing about the pain, the betrayal, the years lost, because she didn't need that burden. She only needed to know she had a grandmother, and that I was here, finally, in the present, ready to be part of her story. The journal from Gloria's daughter Vanessa sat on my table, worn and heavy with the weight of truth. Every page chronicled her mother's meticulous planning, the photographs, the payments, the careful manipulation. She had constructed a perfect narrative designed to isolate me, to convince my husband, to poison the perception of my children. But the irony of it all was that truth cannot remain buried forever. Even after 23 years, the journal had surfaced, delivering justice not with confrontation, but with revelation. And in that revelation, my children could finally see me, not as a guilty figure, but as a woman who had survived. Sitting at my small kitchen table, I often reflected on the journey that brought me here. 43 years of nursing, decades of proving myself in a world that underestimated me at every turn. And then the most personal test of all, surviving the betrayal of someone I had once trusted as family. Every challenge had been a lesson in patience, in strength, in the quiet perseverance required to maintain your dignity. And here, in this quiet apartment, with my daughters close and my granddaughter soon to meet me, I felt the culmination of those lessons. I do not apologize for leaving that night in 2002. I have nothing to apologize for. I walked away because there was nothing left to fight with. My husband's hand rested on the shoulder of the woman who had schemed against me. All he offered was silence. I left with clarity, not bitterness. I left understanding that some battles are not meant to be fought head-on, and some lives require distance to preserve self-respect. When Kayla finally arrived, the moment was surreal. A young woman, bright-eyed and curious, standing at the threshold of my small apartment, meeting the grandmother she had never known. I held her face in my hands, and the weight of stolen years did not matter. She had her life, and I had mine. All that mattered was this moment, this connection, and the possibility of building something new, untainted by the mistakes, lies, and betrayals of the past. I said nothing of the past, because she didn't need to carry it. All she needed was the presence of the one who had loved her from the beginning, even if she hadn't yet known it. I thought of Marcus, sitting quietly with the journal, absorbing the truths he had never been allowed to see. I thought of Diane, holding my hands and sharing the intimacy of long-lost mother-daughter connection. I thought of Terence, distant, but perhaps one day ready to reconcile, understanding that even silence cannot permanently sever the bonds of family. And in all of this, I realized something profound. Life gives us moments of closure, not to erase the pain, but to teach us how to live despite it. I am 87 years old, and I have lived through love, betrayal, patience, and revelation. I have faced a world that underestimated me, a family that misunderstood me, and a life that challenged me at every turn. And yet, here we were, standing not broken, but complete in my own truth. I will not make excuses. I will not apologize for living my life with integrity, even when the world tried to rewrite my story. Every morning I sit at my kitchen table with my coffee, looking out at the city that has been both cruel and kind to me. I reflect, I breathe, I acknowledge the decades that shaped me. I am here, fully present, and that is more than enough. The past no longer has power over me. The betrayals no longer define me. My children, my granddaughter, and the life I still have are proof that endurance, truth, and patience are not just virtues. They are survival. And as I close this chapter, I understand that walking away was not weakness. Walking away was wisdom. Walking away was the ultimate act of self-respect in a world that sought to diminish me. The lessons of those years are etched into my very being, and I carry them not as scars, but as maps, guiding me through the rest of my life. I am 87 years old. I have never apologized for leaving, and I never will. Because some acts are not mistakes. They are the quiet, courageous choices that preserve your soul. And now, after decades of silence, I can finally live, not under the shadow of someone else's lies, but in the light of my own truth.